You get a lot of insight into how the commission works, and in the end, I mean, that's sort of what we studied. So I figured it's a sort of rite of passage that everybody had to pass. So I applied the second time, and then I got in. So I figured, okay, I'll do the Blue Book. It seems like a great experience, a great just general career path to pass through. And I did my Blue Book actually in Juncker's cabinet. So his last, I guess I was sort of his last trainee. But it was fabulous. I mean, the guy is very nice, and it was a great experience. I think he was very nice every time I saw him. But beyond that, that was just the social aspect. I think in the cabinet, people were quite welcoming, albeit a little bit sort of high level. So a lot of the work streams that we had, and this is sort of one thing that's useful in consulting, I would say. There was a lot of work streams. Every single member of cabinet was responsible for their own portfolio that was related to a different cabinet. So you'd have security and defense, you'd have digital affairs, you'd have international development and cooperation, you'd have the person responsible for relations with Africa, etc. So it was a great experience to be able to sort of get exposed to all of those various work streams and the different sort of paradigms of the commission and the focal areas of the cabinets themselves. And then, well, why did I decide to go into consulting? I don't know. I guess maybe it would have been a bit of an unconventional path, because essentially I'm doing business consulting, if you will. So I'm working at Deloitte doing a cloud transformation project. So it's very technical, but it's also quite strategic. So it actually has nothing to do with affairs. It's completely separate. And we focus more on sort of bringing benefits to clients through cloud transformation, everything from cost optimization to, for instance, running Internet of Things and artificial intelligence, machine learning, all of that for companies to basically optimize their business processes, but also to realize more significant innovation in various sectors. So it's definitely a pure business focus, but for me, I think consulting brings with it a lot of very good capabilities that you can use in any aspects in life. One of them being, for instance, project management. So you have several different work streams that you're involved with, and you have to be able to sort of organize yourself adequately, and you have to be able to, let's say, identify the major objectives related to a specific work stream or a project or what have you. So it allows you to sort of have a wider breadth of responsibility, but also gives you the ability and the skills to zoom in on the details and to be very sort of crisp and concise with things. And also, I think in consulting, not only Deloitte, but a lot of consulting companies, any of the big four, or even the big three, the MBBs, they like to focus and invest in personal development. So you're young, you go in there, and in fact, big consulting companies make the biggest bang for their buck from junior consultants and consultants in general. Everything from director and partner upwards, that's not sort of it's essential, but it's not where they get the most of their revenue from. So they invest in you as an individual, and you have a very clear career path that you follow. So you have a very rigid promotional track every 2 years, and you're regularly coached as well. They pay for MBAs. You can follow various internal courses. You can learn coding. It's essentially a bit like a university. So for me, that was a very sort of enticing aspect, and also, not to mention the fact that it's a permanent contract. It's not a fixed term contract. Sometimes, like you would have in the commission, where it's a couple weeks or a couple months, or renewed every now and again. So I had an offer to stay in the SecGen for a year as a cast agent, but it just didn't seem too appealing, because the way they sold it to me was obviously, well, you can't get promoted. It's for a year, and we don't know if we can keep you. So to me, that was a bit of a no-brainer. I was like, okay, guys, well, thanks, but no thanks. And also, so I think consulting offers a lot of also travel opportunities. If you want to work in a company like Deloitte, Ernst & Young, PwC, or whatnot, you can easily transfer to a different member firm if you want to get some international experience. Also, I've had a couple, business trips and projects where we went abroad to the States or whatnot. So it's a great sort of, I would say, stint when you're young. I think it provides you a lot of valuable lessons, and it's really very well refined for young people and giving you the necessary skills to succeed. Also, in fact, one of my co-Blue Book trainees who was in the cabinet of Moedas, the Portuguese commissioner, he was a McKinsey consultant, and he said that a lot of the aspects and a lot of the work streams in the commission weren't very proper because a lot of them overlapped, or they weren't very clear on what the objective and the goal was. So he said that they basically, in the cabinet, they employed him as sort of a consultant, and they asked him to sort of compartmentalize and segment things. So overall, to wrap up, I think consulting gives you a very good problem solving skills. It allows you to look at the bigger picture, and to compartmentalize and segment a problem into bite-sized, manageable work streams that you can then deal with. And I think that's generally a skill that's useful in any job. So I guess that's a pretty good summary of everything. So happy to hand it back to you, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate.
Well, thank you so much. That gives us, I guess, a very broad picture of where you came from, how your traineeship at the commission was kind of the moment where you then decided to take another turn. And I think we have a lot of questions, especially on how your background connects, of course, with the work of a consultant. But before we turn to the questions, I would yield the floor to Stefano, and you can also introduce yourself, where you come from, where you did your traineeship, and also what kind of led you to become a consultant.
Okay, so hi Lisa, hi Anthony, thanks for the invite. And I'm Stefano De Luca. I'm working for Cullen International, that is a consultancy firm that does regulatory intelligence. So we write studies, reports, and we do some masterclass on the telecom and digital economy framework. I joined the commission back in March 2016, so it's 4 years already. And I graduated in law in Italy. This was in 2012, imagine. After that, I had a state-of-the-art at the European University Institute in Florence, always in telecoms regulation. And afterwards, I did an LLM at UCLA School of Law in California. Let's say that the academic path wasn't the same of the career path, because I went through many traineeships. So traineeship, it's tough sometimes, but you shouldn't be discouraged, because it's a process. And maybe you're lucky, and after the first master, you can get a job offer. So it really depends. It's a sliding door. So I had different experience. I started to work as a trainee at the General Prosecutor of the State, defending the public administration and also following some cases related to secret services and things like that. So it can happen everything at the General Office of the Prosecutor of the State. And afterwards, well, not afterwards. Actually, the problem is that in Italy, you are not paid if you work at the General Prosecutor of the State Office. So what I did, I was also working in a boutique that was doing telecoms regulation in particular. So it was a law firm. We were defending the incumbent operator in Italy. After that, I went to work for an international law firm. I was doing project financing. That actually means preparing all the security documents for the big investment in renewables project like solar panels and so on. But I didn't like it. I mean, it was one of the best experience in terms of learning curve, because in international law firm, you need to be very dynamic, very fast. You need to deliver. But absolutely, I felt it wasn't my path. So what I did afterwards, I went to Hong Kong to work for Pernod Ricard, that is a luxury beverage industry. And I was doing there legal affairs and basically international trade. I was studying the tariff system and so on. When I was in Hong Kong, I received the offer from the European Political Strategy Center, that is the in-house think tank of the European Commission, or it was the in-house think tank of the European Commission under President Juncker. And they select me because actually I was working in the telecoms and digital economy team. So we were doing foresight analysis on the industry. So where we want to go, it's fiber to the home, it's 5G, the future of telecommunication, and so on. Let's say at the end of the traineeship, I was interested in finding something in the commission, but I tailor my choice in few DGs and few units, because what it was important for me wasn't to remain in the golden cage, whatever it takes. It was more to find the units which was working on things that I like, so connectivity, connected cars, artificial intelligence, and so on. I failed on this, and at the same time, I had the opportunity through the European Commission to meet Callen International, that is an independent regulatory consultancy that is doing research in a natural way. So I based some of the paper that we published with the European Political Strategy Center on the research of Callen International at that time. And I discovered them also thanks to the work I was performing at the Commission. So I would say this is the link. The link was I did research in the US, because after the LLM, I was actually cooperating with a professor for additional 6 months. And this consultancy job is giving me this kind of opportunity. So to research, to do benchmark, to meet with clients and see where things are moving on certain topics. So I would say that's the picture. And why I wanted to work for them. Well, it's a very flexible environment in which you can also telework from home and so on. So you don't have, it's the output what it matters. You don't have to badge. And second thing, I can be multitasking. I'm not working only on one topic, but I need to sell contracts, follow renewals, writing study, make presentation in-house for clients, teaching in masterclass. So I think it's the variety that the private sector can offer you. And as Anthony said, for example, I had the opportunity to go to travel to the Dominican Republic in order to be a speaker for the International Telecommunication Union event, that is an agency of the United Nations for Telecoms. Those are the opportunity. I mean, you have many opportunities in the private sectors, are different, and I need to agree with Anthony. I was also scared by the European Commission system in this sense. Or you enter from the main door, so the EPSO, or you can go through the path of intérimaire, FG contract, FG2, FG3, etc. It's normal, and in the meanwhile, you can study, you can sit for the exam, you can pass it. I have friends that did exactly this path. After the traineeship, they found a way to stay. The problem is that it's like having a sword on your head. You don't know what is happening the year after. So I mean, it depends upon you. Now I feel I have control. I feel I'm building expertise in a field, and that's a little bit the story.
Well, thank you so much. It's really interesting to see that both of you come from this legal background, and then you passed via the commission, and then you turned to the private sector. So I think this first question kind of ties into this. So with having a legal background, how would you say does that help you working in the consulting field? And did it help you? Did it kind of influence your working style? Or do you think that this was just the basic education that you then built up a new skill set while working in the private sector? Yeah, maybe Anthony, if you want to go first, and then Stefano.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so essentially, I think law helps you. It's a pretty good background in the sense that it gives you an eye for detail, and I think that specifically in a lot of work, in a lot of jobs and industries, but especially in consulting, is highly valued. I say the devil is always in the details, but it's true. And well, it depends which area of law you actually you get into. For me specifically, I was very interested in competition law, and then it's sort of the tech industry struck a chord with me, and I wrote my thesis about big data and algorithms and competition law, and that was sort of my start to my tech infatuation. So from there on, essentially, even when I worked when I was doing my blue book, I was doing some digital affairs as well, and a lot of my background, a lot of my work as well was tech focused prior to that. So that's sort of what gave me the edge, and I guess applying for technology at Deloitte. And I would say that's what helped me. But law in general, it helps you structure things. It helps you structure arguments. It helps you structure ideas, and it gives you an attention to detail. So.
Stefano, do you have any additional points you would like to mention?
Oh, yes, I agree. I mean, it's a jolly. If you graduate in law, you can study all the types of regulation. You know that you need to be precise. You know, it's very important. I think at writing. Writing is one of the most difficult thing in the world. No, everyone more or less is good at chatting on things, but when you need to structure an email or structure a report, it's completely a different issue. And I need to say that depends. For example, law in Italy, it's very oral. Now you have oral exam, but fortunately, at least in my experience, there were also written exam, and in particular in the US, they push me to do that, and it helps you to structure your thoughts in a clear manner for everyone. And if you work for a huge organization, so you're not having meetings with 10 people, but your force need to travel, let's say, and meet 100 person, etc. It's very important to structure it well, and law is giving you these tools to structure your force, to do additional research, and come up with a point. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to see how there are different ways of approaching consulting, and this is maybe where I want to tie in. So you went from this legal background to the traineeship. So what was your fondest blue book experience, to come back to what you've lived in the commission? Especially, I guess both of you had very exciting DGs and or cabinets that you worked in. So if you have a couple of impressions you want to share, please go ahead.
I guess I would say for me, the fondest memory was having a drink with Juncker. I think nothing beats that.
That's indeed
Indeed.
cool.
Yeah. So that was great. I mean, we got to meet a lot of sort of heads of state, and even when the new Ukrainian president was elected, he came to the cabinet for a meeting, as well as the Moldovan prime minister. So it was a tumultuous time with a lot of things going on, and it was interesting to sort of be a part of that. But in general, I think the commission gives you a certain level of prestige, like a prestige badge, if you will, that you can carry to most places in Europe, and even in North America, I would say, or even in the world for that matter. I mean, if you say, I worked at the commission, I did this or that, or in this DG or in that DG, I think it's sort of a badge of honor that gives you credibility. Because in the end, right, it is a very rigorous selection process, and I think a lot of employers, a lot of people in general know that. So if you if you have on your CV the fact that you've been in the commission, that means you already passed a very rigorous selection process. Somebody saw something in you that must be very valuable. So I think in general, everyone on this call, but also everybody that has done or is doing the Blue Book, is in a very privileged position. And I think everybody here has an edge to essentially apply it to wherever you want. I mean, I guess Stefano and I are case in point that, you can go from working in the commission to working in the private sector in consulting. And I'll also furthermore agree with what Stefano said, being that, if you work in private sector, you're in charge of your career, right? Like I said, for me specifically, well, in Deloitte in general, I mean, if you do well, within 5 years, you can be a manager. Within 7 years, you're a director. I mean, you can hit partner in 15 years, right? And that's a very interesting line of work. So it's you're sort of the master of your own fate, and it's a very dynamic environment, and it's something that the commission is a great place to work. It's full of plethora of interesting people, but the problem is sometimes you might end up in a unit that's very specific and very niche, and if you stay there too long, if you ever want to leave and go to the private sector, it might be very difficult for you to sell yourself. Whereas if you've done the Blue Book, you can say, at least I know the other side. I know how it works. I know how the public institutions work, and then you can sort of bring that expertise with you. So, you can really sell it any which way you want. I mean, you can, there is no clear career trajectory after the commission. You can, whatever you put your mind to, you can play around with the words in your application. You can try to, show your interest in various things, but ultimately it's a boost that that helps you in any field of work.
That sounds amazing. I think you kind of hit what we were expecting. So how this inserts for our future life. But now also Stefano. So what was your funnest experience, and maybe if you want to touch also upon how it inserts in generally in a CV and a resume.
Sure. So from a human point of view, let's say it was the long weekend in the Ardennes, because we had an adventure committee, and so they organized these 3 days in the Ardennes, and we were 150 persons. It was incredible, really, because of course there were my friends, but then there were so many new people I met there, and it was great. It was an incredible way to be together, to live the dream, because I know that at the time of the coronavirus, it's not fair. It's not fair I'm saying these things, but part of the experience was actually meeting all the other trainees, be together, and imagine that I had a flatmate for 3 years here in Brussels, and it was a former colleague, a former trainee, my session. So this was great, the bonding that you can create. Professional point of view, I mean, it was cool to see how the system worked from inside. I mean, of course, I've studied European law, but what was an inter-service consultation, how to oil the system with conferences, because then inside the European Commission and among commissioners, you need to find common ground to decide certain steps. It was a learning process also that. How can this experience help you to find a job in the private sector? As Anthony said, it's a pass. I mean, you already achieved something because you passed a selection. Not all the people that are applying are admitted. For example, I applied twice, and I was admitted only the second time. Actually, let's try to be practical. In Brussels, there is lobbying. And if you want to do lobbying, you need to have some contact inside the European Commission. So the first thing is, if you already were inside, probably with your network, you know some people. What does it mean? It means that maybe you can have a dinner, you can ask for a lunch, you can ask for a meeting, because the good lobbying is actually helping the policymaker to make smart decisions. And a policymaker cannot know everything about all the topics, and it's important to know what the Consumer Protection Association thinks about it, what the incumbent of the industry thinks about it, and so on. So for sure it's the network that you have inside. After 5 months, it's not that you're gonna sell this great portfolio of contacts, but it's already something. And as a junior, it's not expected that you have a drink with President Juncker. You can be someone that, I mean, if you're lucky enough, like Anthony, that's great. But otherwise, you can bring your own contact. Secondly, it's mainly the network and mainly knowing how it works inside. So you put already one foot inside the door. You know more or less what to expect, but it's your choice. Private sector, public sector, it depends. If you have a dream to work for the European Union, if you have a particular topic of interest you want to follow, is so huge, the European Commission. You just need to find the right unit. And if you think that is not dynamic enough for you, you can try to change. For me, it wasn't a great card because I'm an analyst. I'm just doing regulation, you know. So actually, it wasn't a core asset to sell to my employer. But of course, it helped me a lot because I'm following certain file, and let's say I'm following connected cars. If I know someone that was a colleague that is working in DG Move, you can ask him out for a lunch. You can have a conversation, and maybe let's see what are the other steps, without going to confidential information and so on. Just thinking, what are you planning? You can miss some deliveries and so on. So yeah, that's what I see.
That's definitely, the network part is something we are currently a little bit short on, because our drinks that we have are e-drinks or the virtual happy hours. So it's not exactly the same, but let's hopefully it's gonna change, and then we're also gonna have drinks, whether it is with the president or with our unit. But thank you so much for this insight. I think this is maybe where I want to turn to the moment where you decided I'm gonna start the application process. So how did you, when did you start the application process? How did you prepare? And maybe if you can say a few things, for example, about valuable resources where you can find good prep books or forums, etc. I think that's something that that would be very great to know for people that want to join a consultancy afterwards.
So application, actually, in fact, I started quite early on, literally after my first month in the Blue Book. I already started applying specifically. I don't know. I did sort of the prospect of, you know, I don't know. I never really applied to the commission, but I'm sure you had enough JPP people tell you how that worked. So I'm not gonna obviously get into that. But I did start quite early. Because depending on the company you apply to, they have different employment cycles. So I would say applying for consultancy, so like companies like EY, PwC, Deloitte, and whatnot, they also have recruiting sort of cycles that start in that are for September and for January every year, a bit like the commission, and you're supposed to start a bit several months in advance, and you have to pass several interviews, and then you have to go in for a case interview or two, depending on the position you're applying for. Now, I can only really speak from the perspective of being in technology, which is a little bit different to the public sector, because Deloitte does have a public sector team. And they have a recruitment process whereby you apply to the specific unit. It's called public sector policy, and you do usually a 3-month internship, after which they normally hire you as a consultant. But for me specifically, I sort of treated it as a second Blue Book. So as you all probably know, you have to lobby when you get in the Blue Book, and you have to send your expression of interest around. And that's sort of what I did. I applied to Deloitte for the normal semester intake for September for technology. I didn't get in. And then I just figured, okay, well, that's, you know, might as well give it another shot. So I found the partner, the senior partner who leads the whole technology project, and the whole European-wide cloud transformation initiative in Deloitte. And I just reached out to him by email. I said, hey, look, currently working here in the commission in the cabinet, I'd be interested in working, for you. I looked up a little bit what you do, what kind of projects you've been involved with, and I think I'd be a good fit because this, and this, here's my CV, feel free to reach out. And then he wrote back and he said, yeah, I'll give it a thought. And then I got invited for a case interview at Deloitte, and those you can usually prep with if you go on mbbcaseprep.com or whatnot. It's a traditional business case where a client comes to you with a specific ask, or his business is failing, or he's losing money somewhere, and you have to come up with a structured solution on how to resolve their problem. So I had the case interview there, and then I wrote to him and I said, hey, I'm in the office. Would you like to meet for coffee? And he said, yeah, sure. So we met for a coffee, and he said, you know what? I really like how proactive you are. So I'm going to hire you. You start next week. And I guess the lesson from that is really sort of, put yourself on the radar, be proactive, even if you get rejected. Actually try to drill in and find the unit or the person that you really want to work with and pester them a little bit. People love it, especially, partners and senior executives, because they feel, like they mean something to someone younger, and they're happy to kickstart somebody's career. So, my lesson would just be, if you have a specific company you want to work with, look up the person, reach out to them personally by email, say, hey, here's my CV. This is why I'd be good for your unit, department, or what have you. And just be proactive. That's all I can say, really. I think that's the best lesson.
Okay, well, that's great advice, but we're gonna get to advice also a little bit later. So now I'm gonna ask Stefano the same thing. Can you elaborate on when did you start applying and how the whole application process went? Did you also use MBA case prep forums, or what was exactly the situation in your application?
So in my case, let's say the first month I just enjoyed the ride. I mean, I was new to the city. I was understanding a little bit the team for whom I was working for. And so I took my time. But at the end of the second month, let's say third month, I started to look actively for a job. And you have this Europe Brussels, Euractiv, then I can send you a link that you can share with other trainees. That it's the Irish Green Book on how to find a job in Brussels. It gives you some advice. I don't know if you already knew about it, but it's quite cool. It's giving some tips, explaining a little bit how the different positions work if you want to stay in the commission or reach the private sector. It's long, but you can just read from page 158 to 200, so it's okay. And that's the tool. Of course, it's clear that with this situation you cannot play the personal relation and meeting people face to face, but there is LinkedIn. There are webinars when you can ask questions and so on. Try to be active also on LinkedIn. Try to, if you're following specific topics, just sometimes also make a link to a newspaper article on something. And that's also a way to be followed a little bit. In my case, yes, it was the fourth month of my traineeship. I received an offer for an interview from Callen International, that is the company I'm working for now. And they had quite a structured process, because the first meeting was just a chat on my background, why I was applying and so on. So it's very important to study the company, to understand the person you have in front. So Google it. Google if he wrote a research, or he published a paper. Read the paper, and that's the way to tease him. Now, I saw that, or I like this topic. Those are little tricks, but sometimes work. And after that, I had a practical test. So they gave me 200 pages of a spectrum auction. That is actually when you sell spectrum for mobile. And what happened is that I had 4 hours to read everything and write a report of 3 pages. So that's the way they were working. So you need to be fast because you need to publish a report. You cannot be too late for the client, otherwise he would read it somewhere else. And just, you know, eliminate all the information that are not relevant and focus on the main points. The third test was a PowerPoint presentation. They gave me a topic 1 week before, and I had to present this topic in front of 4 persons. And the last one, that was also for me the best one, was the good guy test. What is the good guy test? They invited me out for dinner, and they let me drink. They let me drink because actually this is what happens when you're meeting clients. Or if you're selling contracts, you go to public events or conferences, you need to be a nice guy. And after that, they decided to hire me. But so there were these 4 steps.
Well, thank you so much. I think this is so hilarious that they made you drink and see whether you can still stand, I guess, and present the company. Now, but joke aside, it's interesting to see that both of you kind of had a different interview process and have experienced different also case studies or the report to write. I think for us, it's also good to know because we all come from the different parts of Europe. And if you want to find a job in Brussels in particular, there are a lot of caveats and especially when it comes to the language. So is in your current job or your current position, do you need to be fluent Dutch or French speaker, or is English enough, or do they make you learn either language?
Short answer, I guess, no. I mean, English is sufficient. Although my boss is Belgian French, so he loves to speak French. So if we can, we do. But otherwise, the formal language of communication in Deloitte worldwide is English. So yeah. So that also ties back to one of the questions in the chat. You don't need French or Dutch. It helps to have one or both, but you don't need it.
I completely agree. You don't need it. I would say French is quite important if you want to do lobbying in particular. It can be an asset, but it's I mean, everything is in English, so never had a problem with that.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know because sometimes that's a little bit the little aspect that is that might actually be a game changer for some. But just to get back to how you went from, let's say, the European or the legal background to consulting. So how do you think that during your application process, how did you highlight it in terms of skills? So what you said that you learned how the system works, etc. But if you were to say 3 aspects that you really pushed forward when applying, saying this is something that I learned, which then can be useful in consulting, because I think for us now it is important to see how when we decide to go to the private sector to sell the public sector experience. And I mean, we talked about networks and everything, but if you say you need to present and write reports, is that something you think that you enhance while being at the commission, or would you say that there's no real tie between the two?
Well, I would say one of the things that's very valuable in consulting and the commission alike is coordination. There's a lot of coordination with everything. I mean, you all know exactly how it works. I mean, piece of work has to get filtered several times, approved and whatnot. And ultimately, consulting is quite a lot of coordination. I mean, you have to coordinate with different teams. You may have a project where you use, you know, the finance department, the M&A department, the strategy department, and you have to coordinate across everybody. So that's definitely something I would put down. But also the ability to sort of to work on sensitive topics under pressure. I think that's really important to highlight. And the third aspect, you sort of you put a framework here, and I'm trying to look for a third one. I don't know. I mean,
not intentional.
yeah.
If you have a third aspect, you know, the golden three, you know. But yeah.
Well, you could say that you know, working with sort of cutting edge policies and things that really have a huge impact, right? I mean, when you work in the commission, you're working on policies, on projects that impact usually all of Europe, right? So I think that's something that I would really, really bring home if I were you. Say, you know, I worked on the commission. I mean, this is really high level stuff. And that, you know, your ability to sort of to function properly and execute tasks to a very high standard. I think that's something else that I would definitely push forward.
Stefano, how about you?
This is in the sense that every one of us has a different experience. No, not all the trainees are working in the same DG or actually performing the same job. It depends. If you look at the private sector, you can also be a project manager. If in the commission you were helping organizing event, you were coordinating people, that's an asset because you were doing internally what sometimes the European Commission delegates externally. So that's an opportunity that you can apply, that you can highlight. What else? In my case, it was easier. I mean, I was writing paper. I'm writing paper. So I was saying, look, I always work in this sector, that is the telecom, the digital sector. I was publishing paper on that. I always did master and state of the art in this topic. And you are a boutique working on this topic. So I'm the right guy. So try to sell also your bag, just not focus on the, maybe for some of you, the European Commission is the forced traineeship. But if you have other experience, don't focus only on the European Commission. Focus on all your assets because you are full of assets. So you need to work on everything. Your life is not one opportunity. It's not only the European Commission. Maybe you have worked for an NGO when you were studying, or I don't know. Maybe you develop some skills in Erasmus, like languages or many of the questions. I mean, in an interview, they can ask you, can you tell me one difficult things you need to cope with? Maybe it was your Erasmus, and it wasn't something that happened during your 5 months of traineeship in the European Commission under COVID. So it's a little bit this. Look at the big picture. The European Commission, it's a card you can play. Don't overplay it sometimes. Remember if I may, I mean, this was my experience. Here in Brussels, every person speaks more than 2 languages, 3, 4 languages. If you don't have a master at College of Europe, London School of Economics, the US, or whatever, for sure you have a master in some other university. So there are well-prepared people. That's what I want to say. The competition is tough here. So what is important for me was to really focus on one field and build your narrative. My narrative was, I always follow one path. My final dissertation thesis was on public Wi-Fi when I was in Rome, in Italy, studying law. So try to build a little bit a narrative. And then it's also luck, because if you want to stay in Brussels, you will find a job. So on this, I want to be positive. All the people that wanted to remain in Brussels, they figure out to do that. Unfortunately, there is a component of luck. For me, for example, I wrote an email to this corporation and to this company, and they called me for an interview. Why? Because the person that was dealing with the telecoms regulation in Italy actually went away. So they were looking for someone that was graduate in law and speaking Italian. And Italian sometimes is not an asset, because here is full of Italians. And if you apply to a company, they're saying, oh my gosh, another Italian. Oh no, please, because no. Also to work in the commission, they can say, well, there is a quota, there is not. Officially, there is not a quota. You know, it's play on your language skills, play on your background, not focus on only on this shot. That's my advice.
That's actually interesting, because I feel that I also have a lot of Italians in my unit, but so definitely it was a lot of luck that they were looking for someone. But I wanted to add back to what you said about the interview questions. Was there a question during the interview process that you found that caught you off guard, or you found particularly surprising? Not that it was a catch, but something that you were not really expecting?
Well, as I mentioned, I had a bit of an unconventional interview process, but maybe I would say during sort of the case interview, it was, I think if I remember correctly, it was a biodegradable waste company that wanted to expand its production. There was a lot of elements to it, and one of it was sort of the profit and loss account sheets that you had to sort of examine and determine where they were losing money, and was their capex too high, for example. So again, I can only speak from my experience. I don't work in EU affairs now, and it was a very specific sort of very specific area. So I entered into a field that was a little bit separate from European politics and European affairs. However, if that's something that interests you, well, basically, I would tell you to brush up on your business skills. I would tell you to maybe take some case interview examples, and just generally, ultimately, consulting is about logical thinking. How can you strategize, and how can you look at the big picture and then drill into several segmented fields to help solve that big picture, right? So the amount of I would say finance in my case interview caught me a little bit off guard, but if you make a little bit of a math mistake, it doesn't really matter. Any interview you go to, the interviewer, the employer, will take into account your background, right? There's no holy grail of how to perform on a specific case interview. It's about how you can actually structure the problem, how you can think logically, and how you can tie everything together, simply.
So I actually want to ask a question that was that we got is do you feel like you had to justify your move to especially technology and consulting, or was that something that didn't really come up?
I think so, and I think, anytime you apply somewhere, you have to justify it, right? If you go in there thinking you're entitled to the position, it's not going to bode very well. But in particular, yes, I think my current boss, when I was speaking to me, he asked me, well, why don't you want to stay in the commission? I mean, you have a very sort of like legal background, and yes, tech as well, but I mean, you have a lot of sort of EU law and politics and whatnot. So I said, well, I think that these are sort of skills that I can develop, and I think consulting is one of these areas where there's no traditional career path or academic path that leads you to it. Yes, there's the conventional sort of business engineering, any type of engineering really, but if you sell yourself well enough, anybody can do well in consulting. And there's also a lot of people with legal backgrounds in consulting that also do sort of mergers, acquisitions, finance and financial restructuring, etc. So yeah, you have to justify a little bit. I had to justify it as to why, but it's something that it's doable. I mean, nowadays, I don't think that academia, the sort of the academic path you follow, defines your career at all. I mean, I have plenty of friends that have worked in various fields. I mean, I worked in legal affairs. I worked in a political think tank for a brief stint. I worked in the commission, and now I work in technology consulting. There's no sort of set career path, and I always like to think to myself that sort of your unique value proposition and what you bring to the table is essentially the combination of your unique past experiences, right? So the more you have, the better. I mean, if somebody sees someone that has a bachelor's in chemical engineering, master's in biomedical engineering, went through consulting all their lives, that's impressive. But ultimately, there's a lot of people that follow that similar path. if you find someone that has a diverse background, then they can effectively bring their experiences from so many different areas, industries, and jobs that, you know, it's a very unique combination. It's a very healthy mixture, I would say. And, you know, law would give you the ability to work under pressure for very long hours. You know, working in the commission gives you the ability to interact with people, to coordinate, to draft very high level pieces of work. And then, you know, consulting would allow you to learn project management, to learn how to deconstruct a problem into separate segments and be able to solve a larger problem through solving smaller problems, and in that sort of manner of thinking. So I think, you know, your unique combination of experiences is what really is your value and your selling point.
Yeah. That kind of resonates with me, so that's really good to hear that. So Stefano, I'd also ask you kind of the same question. So did you feel like you had to justify your move or not? Yeah.
No, I didn't have to justify the move, even though for sure you need to explain. I don't think that 5 months of your life are actually transforming you in a prisoner of the public institution. I mean, it's a great opportunity. You can sell it to the private sector and saying, look, I wanted to see how it worked. I studied these things. I was actually fond of the European Commission to see the heart of Europe living in Brussels, if you're coming from abroad, and so on. And I don't think that an employer will really go there to make the point, oh, okay, no, so you wanted to be a public servant and now you are turning to the devil side of the business. No, I mean, I would ask this question to a person that has been, let's say, 15 years in the commission and wants to turn to the private sector. But yes, all the questions are possible. If I were you, I would just say, look, I like that DG. I applied to work in the DG. I love the task that they assigned me, but I'm also very interested to see how it works in the private sector and to cooperate on this topic or whatever you apply for. It depends.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Just because I had a look at the clock, and so we're coming to the end. So I have my favorite question that I ask as the last question, because you were in our shoes, and you know how stressful it is to also think ahead and figure out your life, especially now. We're also tele-trainees, as I'd like to say. So, what is the piece of advice, maybe in one line, that you would give to your blue book self in hindsight? And hindsight is 2020, but maybe there's something that you wish you would have had as an advice back then.
I would say don't try to focus on, you know, if you worked in DevCo and you worked in Eastern Ukraine, don't try to focus on something that'll bring you there. I mean, you can really try and test a wide variety of experiences. I think up until about the age of 35, you can play around with your career. You can change every now and then. I think just try to find something where you think what you really want to do, and then see why you'd fit there, basically. I think, you know, and also, like I said earlier, be proactive, you know, show people that you're interested, because ultimately, if you're proactive, it really puts you on the radar. It shows someone that you're interested, and it shows them that, okay, well, if I hire this person and this person works for me, I'm not going to have to constantly be giving them tasks. I could, you know, leave them alone for a month and trust that they'll be able to manage their own workloads, right? So I think that's something very important. And also, you know, it's good that you guys already want to go into consulting. I think the commission is a great place, but best to go back after several years, maybe decades even, you know, somewhere to a higher position where you can actually have value. I mean, now, you know, private sector is something that allows you to excel and invests in you, whereas at the commission, I think some of the career prospects are a little bit meager. There's no promotion generally. If you're one of the few that passes the EPSO, I mean, more power to you, but I've met people that have passed the EPSO and have been in the same position as an assistant for 5 years. Even though they're making the EPSO salary, they don't really get an increase in responsibility. So, you know, I think it's dynamic. I think private sector is dynamic, and I think it's a good area to get into. And the piece of advice I would give you now, I mean, it's difficult because it's a very particular situation. I think you find yourselves in a time when everything is basically shut and everything is going down in a sense. But I would say, if you're looking for a job, try to find a niche, try to identify maybe the industries that are actually going to flourish after this, right? I mean, what are the key areas that are going to, I wouldn't say profit off of this whole COVID debacle, but areas that are going to grow as a result of it? Try to maybe position yourselves there. I mean, in consulting, there are so many wide areas that you can go into. I mean, you can go into sustainable finance, sustainability. You can go into, you know, also European regulation teams. You can go into, you know, startups and things like that. So try to find that area that's gonna grow, I would say.
That's good advice. Thank you so much. So now, Stefano, last word to you before we close.
Well, it's a basic advice. That doesn't mean stupid, but actually try to really ask yourself what you like, more or less. If you already discover it, or what sectors you like, and then focus on them. If it's, of course, I agree with Anthony that it's already proven that we will change jobs more than 5-6 times before the end of our life. That's not the same society of 20 years ago when you keep your first job and it's going to be forever. So experience. I had also experience in completely different fields. Imagine I was dealing with champagne and then back to digital and law firm and project financing. So those good opportunities to build up your background and to try different things and see, I like this, I don't like it. So just focus on what is the sectors or the things I wanna study. Because in my case, and I'm studying law, reading pages of degree of something that you don't like can be the worst scenario ever. So it's this. If you're really interested in artificial intelligence, or you're interested in renewable energy, or you're interested in pharmaceutical and how to, I don't know, how to find a vaccine for this COVID-19, figure out what you're reading. And then from there, trying to see what are the association, what are the industry in Brussels working on it, and apply. Because sometimes, be prepared, be honest. No, we don't, being an expert is not possible in certain cases when someone is young, etc. So the first thing is, I'm going to an interview, I'm an expert in this. You just graduated, maybe you did 1-2 traineeship and you're already an expert. It's a big word. Someone else should tell you you are an expert and not the opposite. But show that you are interested and you have potential. You are young and you want to learn. I think this is the key to find a job. And be proactive, of course, as Anthony said, to show this interest.
Thank you so much for those last pieces of advice that we're gonna all take back. And now that we're also nearing the half of our traineeship, that will also be very valuable for planning our next steps. So at this, I want to thank both of you for agreeing to join us for this little chat. I learned a lot, and I think I can say that all of our participants will also be able to gain valuable insights, not only to consulting, but also how to maybe structure the whole job search and what to highlight when they do get to the interview process.
But just actually really quickly, I'm, you know, add, maybe it goes for Stefano as well, but feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'll give you my name, and I know that Deloitte hires every September, so if that's something that interests either of you, you know, feel free to reach out. I can recommend you internally, and that always goes a bit easier than outside applying. So, you know, just a small margin.
Well, thank you so much. In that case, maybe if you agree, we're just gonna share your LinkedIn profiles with the participants. Is that something that would be okay for you?
Yeah, no problem.
Stefano, you too? or you can maybe get back to me later on that one.
Problem, but let's people be proactive. Name and surname, and you can find me. Let's start with it.
Yeah. This is how you start. This is how you implement what you get from those events. So with this, my final words, thank you so much, grazie mille, and I will yield the floor back to Andre for the closing remarks and some insight on what's going to come next for the careers team. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa, very much for the floor, and a huge congrats for hosting and moderating such a successful event. To conclude in a couple of personally, I would like to thank to our amazing panelists, Anthony and Stefano, for the fascinating, informative, and most of all, genuine insights into the consulting world. Just a quick remark, as you all know, part of the March survey, we had 238 responses. From these 238 responses, 90.9% of you have said that you'd like to work within a institution. 55.4% said that you'd like to work in a consulting. The comeback from this is that the majority is not an indicator for your career path. As our lovely panelists have mentioned, you can take any path, and this path towards the private sector may seem unconventional, but there are more opportunities besides the public sector. You have transferable skills that can be implemented, and you're all very, very smart individuals that can be successful in any sector, especially within the consultancy domain. And thinking especially that the European Commission is a very high-level place to brand yourself and to promote yourself. Just a quick remark that the recording will be posted in our. According to our GDPR regulations, we've made everyone aware, and we'll have this posted on our YouTube channel. Not open to the public; it will be private. And for the announcement, our amazing EPSO master, Andres Banov, as our high-level speaker, presenting on the 12th of May, next Tuesday at 12 p.m. He'll share you insights in his EPSO book. So stay tuned for more. Please do attend. You'll receive a lot of insights into this. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending, our many, many participants for our very first private sector-oriented event. Thank you very much for our lovely panelists. Thank you very much for our host and moderator, Lisa. And thank you all, our lovely trainees, for attending this event. Thank you very much, and I wish you a lovely evening. All the best. Bye.
Bye. Bye.